What is up, listeners, and welcome back to Slide Into Sports live on 103.1 FM on WVLP Radio. I'm your host, Ryan Schleier, aka Schlide, and ladies and gentlemen, we are 41 days out from Selection Sunday and 44 days out of our first March Madness game, and things in college basketball are really starting to heat up. The AP poll, it's out now, and this is the first time on the show this year that we're going to be dissecting the AP poll and trying to figure out why teams moved certain ways. Now, it's a little bit different than college football because in college basketball, you play a lot more games. A lot of times, especially with in-conference games, you play the same teams twice. So if you're 1-1 against a team, it really depends on the outcome of the game, how recent the game was, and a lot of other different kinds of factors that can affect your ranking. And at the end of the day, the one thing that's kind of similar to college football is the more recent that you win and the more recent your hot streak or win streak is, the better. And that plays more into your favor. Now, with college basketball, they also filter wins through quad 1, quad 2, quad 3, quad 4, and that basically just measures the quality of win that you have. And the reason why I bring this up is because Indiana this week got their first 2 quad 1 wins of the year against UCLA and Purdue. So again, like I said, with Indiana getting those 2 wins, that could maybe cost a team like BYU, who they're good and they're in the AP top 25, but they haven't really accumulated a signature win yet. I mean, they have decent, not bad wins, but they don't really have a signature win that people can really remember besides the game against Miami at, I think, a neutral site. So there's a lot of thinking that goes into this poll, but let's start off with just listing off the teams that are currently in the top 25 as of Monday. So we've got Arizona at number 1. Right now, they're the unanimous number 1 seed. All 59 voters voted Arizona as the number 1 team. Michigan jumped UConn to the number 2 spot, and I think a large part of that was because they faced 2 top 10 opponents back-to-back in the same week and came out on top. So I think that played a huge factor in Michigan jumping UConn to that number 2 spot. UConn, they fall down to number 3. They won. They dominated in their games, especially against Creighton. They won 85-58 against Creighton. So big win by UConn. Duke is at number 4. They were at number 4 last week, and they beat Louisville and Virginia Tech to stay at number 4. Illinois, they jump up to number 5 after beating Purdue and one-loss Nebraska. That one-loss Nebraska game was at Nebraska. That was a huge win for the Illini, and Illinois is starting to look like not an underdog anymore. A lot of people have been kind of saying Illinois is a sneaky team, but Illinois is kind of, in a way, beating those allegations and making themselves known right before the Big Ten Conference Tournament and right before March Madness. So Illinois, I think, is going to be a big team to watch out for. Gonzaga, they're at number 6. They stay at number 6 after beating St. Mary's 73-65. That one's always a tough game for the Zags. Probably their biggest in-conference rival is St. Mary's in Cal, and a lot of the times they go 1-1. I mean, there was a couple years in the 2020s where St. Mary's actually finished out ranked ahead of Gonzaga in the March Madness tournament. So big win for Gonzaga there. Gonzaga's only loss so far this year is to the number 2 Michigan Wolverines. But they got absolutely dominated in that game, which is part of the reason why they're down at number 6 and not ahead of number 5 Illinois, who is 19-3. Iowa State is number 7. They move up 1 spot after just demolishing their opponents. Their most recent win being Kansas State, winning 95-61. They were up 50-23 at the half in that game. It was just an absolute smackdown from the get-go. Kansas State just had no chance in that game. Then we move down to number 8. Houston takes that spot, moving up 2 spots after that win against Cincinnati, 76-54. Nebraska falls 4 spots after losing to Illinois. Now, Nebraska, they fell 4 spots because they lost twice in the same week, but also because it could have been more. I think if it was any other team, it could have been more, but those are Nebraska's only 2 losses so far on their schedule. And in the Michigan game, they were down their top 2 scorers. So I think the committee has a little bit of sympathy for Nebraska, so they're keeping them inside the top 10, and they're keeping them ahead of Michigan State, who Nebraska beat. So Nebraska falls 4 spots, Michigan State falls 3 spots. If Michigan State had beaten Michigan, that would have been a great opportunity for Michigan State to have jumped Nebraska, but Michigan State ended up losing 83-71 to the Wolverines at home. So Michigan State, they round out the top 10 of the AP poll. Then you've got Kansas moving up into the 11th spot. They're currently 16-5, and they got a huge win against BYU, 90-82, and that was at Lawrence, Kansas. But big win for the Jayhawks right there. I mean, BYU has one of the most talented freshmen in the country on their team, and they play really good basketball. It's just not the most complete. They'll have one good half and one okay half, but in that okay half, it's just not enough to put them over bigger teams like Arizona. So big win by Kansas, though, either way. They're currently 16-5. Purdue, they're at number 12. They're 18-4. They actually didn't move from their spot last week, which I found kind of surprising just because they lost to unranked Indiana on Tuesday, and they beat Maryland, who is one of the worst teams in the Big Ten, by 30. And yeah, I think there's definitely some teams that you could put above Purdue, like Texas Tech, even though Texas Tech lost to unranked UCF 88-80. But at least that game against UCF was about the same as Purdue. I mean, both were away games for both these teams, and it was about a 7 to 10 point loss for both of them. So I think Texas Tech probably should get the nod over Purdue, but I guess the committee is respecting the fact that Purdue is 18 wins versus Texas Tech 16 wins. So to each his own, I guess, but I personally would not have put Purdue at 12. I probably would have moved them down at least one spot because it just doesn't really seem like they got punished really at all. Because, I mean, UCLA was also a unranked loss for the Boilermakers, so it just, I don't know. That's just me. But maybe that's also my, inner IU fan coming out a little bit just because, we beat Purdue and yeah, so that might just be me. But anyways, number 14 in the country is North Carolina. They move up 2 spots after beating Virginia and Georgia Tech. And North Carolina, they're a team that they've had pretty good flashes, but sometimes they'll take weird losses. So North Carolina could be a team to watch out for when they get really hot. Number 15 is Vanderbilt. They move up 3 spots, and they had a very close game against Ole Miss. I thought Vanderbilt was going to handle business against them just because Ole Miss is kind of having a down year right now after the year they had last year. But Vandy currently 19-3 and number 15 in the country. So good for Vandy. Then we've got BYU at 16. They fall 3 spots after losing to Arizona on Tuesday and Kansas on Saturday. So, or Sunday. Either way. But big 2-game losing stretch for BYU. They need to get some kind of win to rebuild that momentum before the Big 12 tournament. February is not a month where you want to be caught cold. So, because there's going to be a lot of teams that are maybe like Arkansas, who's 16-6, or Louisville, who's 15-6. Like teams with those records are going to be clamoring for bigger wins. And BYU is one of those teams where they're currently in the AP poll. They're going to be seen as a quad 1 win. So they don't want to be a stepping stone for these other teams to get into the March Madness tournament over the Cougs. Then we've got Florida at 17. Florida currently 16-6. They got a big statement win against Alabama. They beat them 100-77. Alabama currently on a just insane fall off right now. But yeah, great win for Florida. They finally look like they're back in national championship form, just like they were last year. So Florida, even though they're ranked 17th right now, that is going to be a team to watch out for going into March and going into the SEC tournament, because SEC is kind of open to really anybody. The funny thing about the SEC right now is that their number one ranked team in the conference is actually not even in the top 25 in the AP poll, which I found kind of striking. But yeah, just very interesting stuff there within the SEC. It just really seems like anybody in the SEC can win that conference, like just a large plethora of teams that could win the SEC conference. And yeah, I couldn't really tell you who is going to win that conference. Then you've got Virginia at 18. They fall one spot after losing to North Carolina and beating Boston College. Virginia currently 18-3. They're one of the better teams within the ACC. I think Virginia is a little bit of a sneaky team in the ACC. One that, even though, again, they're currently ranked 18th, that is going to be a team to absolutely watch out for. I would absolutely watch out for the Cavaliers. They've got St. Louis moving up to 19th. They're currently 21-1, just on a roll right now. Clemson rounding out the top 20. They're 18-4. They got a win against Pittsburgh, 63-52. And Clemson kind of looking back in that form that they were going into the March Madness tournament last year. The question is, last year, they kind of got cold in the tournament, and they weren't able to hold on as much as they did the year prior. Is Clemson going to do that again, or are they going to actually, hang on and maintain the momentum that they're currently building? Arkansas comes in at 21st. They're 16-6. They took a big L to Kentucky, 85-77. Arkansas falls 6 spots because of this loss. And honestly, I don't think it's that bad of a loss. I mean, if it was 2.5 weeks ago, I probably would have said it was a terrible loss just because of the way Kentucky was playing at that point. But Kentucky is playing like their butts are on fire right now. So I don't really see it as that bad of a loss. I do think Arkansas is still one of the more talented teams in the country, could easily win the SEC Conference Championship in the tournament, not the regular season. Right now, the regular season is looking like Texas A&M is going to win that, but Arkansas has the capabilities to make a run in March. That's going to be a team to watch out for that's outside of the top 20. St. John's, they move up to 22. They move up 3 spots. They beat Butler 92-70, and they're 16-5 in the Big East Conference. I think St. John's, they're pretty good defensively. Offensively, they can be a little bit shaky at times. Definitely does not look like last year's St. John's team, but they are still pretty solid. I mean, I never doubt a Rick Pitino team, so that could be one to maybe watch out in March. But I think if they do make it in, they could be first-round exits just because of how inconsistent they've been this year. Miami, Ohio, they move up to number 23. They move up 1 spot, 22-0. The only other 22-0 country, or 22-0 team in the country right now. They beat Northern Illinois 85-61, and that was less of a closer game than I thought it was going to be, simply because Miami, Ohio has been playing some really close games going into overtime. They've been really high scoring, but Miami, Ohio, they take care of business, and they get it done by about 14, 15 points. So pretty solid win for Miami, Ohio. They just need to keep going with the remainder of their schedule, because if they don't win the MAC Conference Championship, they might miss the tournament. And I think, especially if they lose 1 or 2 games, they might end up missing the tournament. So Miami, Ohio, they have something to play for in the regular season, not just for the conference championship, because, at the MAC, it's hard to take. You don't normally see more than one MAC team make it, and the only MAC team that normally makes it is the one that's the conference championship winner. So Miami, Ohio, they ideally, if they win out, will need to win the conference championship, the MAC conference championship tournament. So Miami, Ohio, if they do make it into the March Madness tournament, they're one to watch out for as well, because they have been, even though they haven't really played the best of teams, they have been putting up some pretty incredible stats. So I would just keep an eye out for them as well. Then at number 24, we've got Louisville. They're 15-6. They fall 4 spots after losing to Duke, and they got manhandled by Duke. But they did get a win against SMU. They won 88-74. And SMU is kind of one of the sleeper teams that I see in the ACC, where you don't really see them as like a top 25 team, but they can take down pretty much anybody. So the fact that they were able to get that win against SMU, I think, was pretty huge for Louisville, especially after the way they got manhandled by Duke. I think that's a great turnaround point to rebuild some momentum and, start getting hot right before the ACC conference title tournament. And then at 25, we have Tennessee at 15-6. They were not in the top 25 last week. They were just outside of it. They did receive votes last week, but they weren't in the top 25. So Tennessee, they make their jump in after beating a very hot Auburn team 77-69. So huge win by Tennessee. But some other teams that were receiving votes, and the receiving votes was surprising and also not surprising, I guess, depending on how you look at it. Texas A&M, they got 83 points in the voting. Again, like I said earlier, Texas A&M is currently on top in the SEC standings, and they're outside of the AP poll. They're on the outside looking in to the top 25, which is surprising to me because, again, like I said, they're on top of the SEC right now in the standings, and they've been playing pretty well. So that's a little surprising. Alabama with 48 points right behind Texas A&M. That was kind of surprising to me just because of how they lost their past two games, the way they lost to Tennessee and the way they lost to Florida. They just did not look good. They looked like one of the coldest teams in the country. So I don't really like Alabama being above teams like UCF, who just got a huge win over Houston, Kentucky, who's hot right now, Villanova, who's doing pretty well in the Big East. I mean, even Indiana, who is currently getting hot right now with 2 quad one wins against Purdue and UCLA. The one against UCLA was on the road and in double overtime. So, no hate to Bama, but I don't think they should have received more votes than a few teams. I think Auburn only getting 8 points is a little bit surprising just because of how hot they had been before they played Tennessee. And then you've got some other teams in here that were receiving votes as well. Iowa received some votes. NC State received a couple votes. Utah State, Miami, Georgia, Santa Clara, George Mason, and Wisconsin. Santa Clara, George Mason, and Wisconsin receiving 1 vote apiece. Or not 1 vote, but I guess they got put in at 25th in someone's poll. But either way, just an interesting combination of teams in the the honorable mention section of the AP poll. But yeah, just a absolutely great time to be locked in on college basketball right now. There's a lot of craziness going on, especially with the Alabama player who's a G League dropout. The Florida fans were chanting G League dropout whenever he was taking free throws. I thought that was hilarious. And the fact that, the fans can really get involved in that way is also just awesome to see. I love to see it. But yeah, I guess some notable games that are coming up. And we're going to preview some of these ranked games later. But just some of the more notable games that are coming up. We've got, I think, Xavier UConn could be an interesting one. I think Virginia Pitt maybe could be interesting. Miami Buffalo. We've got Michigan State Minnesota. Minnesota's been kind of cold the past few games they've played, so Michigan State should win that one. But I think UCF Houston, after UCF got that huge win against Texas Tech, I think that could be a very interesting game. It is at Houston, so that, playing on the road is tough. I think Northwestern Illinois could be interesting just because that's an in-state rivalry. You never know what could happen there in those kinds of games. Clemson Stanford, also very interesting one because Stanford has gotten a few crazy wins this year that nobody thought was going to happen. So I would keep an eye on that one as well. We've also got Michigan Penn State in a rematch. Last time they played, it was very close, but it was at Penn State over winter break. And this Michigan team looks a lot hotter than they did when they played last time. So I think Michigan should win that one, but just because it's a rematch, I think it still could be a very interesting game. We've also got UConn St. John's. That's a big one. Last year, they played for the Big East Conference title, so this will be a nice little rematch from that. St. John's starting to get a little bit hot. UConn has been dominant for pretty much the entire year, besides losing to Arizona, so that one could be something. We've also got the Oregon-Purdue one. I think that one could maybe be something, because Purdue is, I guess, now hot after beating Maryland by 30, but Oregon could surprise them, maybe. I mean, Purdue has been shocked before already this year at their own place against Iowa State, but Oregon is not Iowa State, so we'll see. But Oregon is a well-coached team, so that could be a shocker, possibly. We've also got Illinois, Michigan State. I think that one's going to be a great game. 2 teams in the top 10. We've also got Duke, UNC. That one's always a great game. It's a huge rivalry within the ACC, and not even just within the ACC, but just culturally, these two teams have always despised each other, and it's always a wild game whenever these two teams play. And I think the last 3 games that I think could be of promise or like just crazily interesting is Florida, Texas A&M, because Texas A&M, they're on top of the SEC right now. They're currently unranked. A win against Florida, I think, could get Texas A&M into the top 25 next week, assuming Texas A&M wins their second game of that week. But Florida, they're a really hot team, so if Texas A&M is able to beat them, I think Texas A&M is going to shoot up into that rankings, and they're finally going to get the respect that they deserve. Tennessee, Kentucky is always a crazy game. That one's always a great rivalry, at least in basketball. In football, not so much, but in basketball, it is a great rivalry. We've also got Houston, BYU. That's a top 20 matchup. It's at BYU. BYU is one of the crazier and tougher arenas to play in, so like in college basketball right now. And I think the final game that we probably are going to keep an eye on, or we will need to keep an eye on, is Arizona versus Kansas. It's going to be at Kansas, and Kansas is kind of on a hot streak right now. So Arizona might want to be a little bit careful going into Lawrence, but I think that one will be a very tight game. Those two teams are very talented consistently, and this year, both teams are just absolutely amazing from what I've seen on the basketball court so far. So, yeah, with that being said, we're going to take a little break and hear a message from our sponsor before we go into these previews of all the games coming up. This broadcast is brought to you by Authentic Impact, a Northwest Indiana executive coaching practice working with family businesses to ensure their legacy. When you started your business, you made a promise to do things differently, better than anyone else. Over time, as the business grows, that promise can get diluted or even lost. Penny Schleier at Authentic Impact helps family business owners reignite that promise, weaving it into team engagement, performance, and hiring so your passion becomes the heartbeat of your company again. Learn more at authentic-impact-coaching.com. All right, so let's start looking ahead to some of these other games. Now, I know I didn't do a lot of post-game analysis, but part of that is because I'm now doing that more in the AP poll breakdown, and also I do post-game analysis on TikTok, and I share that there. So if you want to listen to post-game analysis of some of these games, then head over to the TikTok at Slide Into Sports. But for right now, we're going to be previewing games that are coming up, and part of the reason why I'm doing it this way is just because now there's going to be more time to actually preview these games. So you're going to get more and better previews of these college basketball games. So with that being said, let's get right on into this. So we've got the Miami, Ohio versus Buffalo game. It's going to be at Buffalo. These two teams have played already, and it was pretty close the last time they played, but I do like Miami, Ohio, not just because they're undefeated, but because, It's hard to be undefeated. I've talked about how they've been putting up amazing stats. So I think Miami, Ohio, they should win this one. I do think it'll be one of those close games again, though, that we see them play. I wouldn't be surprised at all if this goes into overtime. So we're going to go with Miami, Ohio. I'm going to say by 2 points in singular overtime. That's what I'm thinking. I think it's going to go to single overtime, but I think Miami, Ohio is going to win by 2. So, yeah, give me the Hawks for that one. Then we've got Xavier versus UConn. Xavier, they aren't doing too bad. I mean, they're starting to get back on track. They had a 2-point win against DePaul, but before that, they were on a 3-game losing streak after losing to Creighton back on January 21st. They lost 94-93, but a lot of these games that Xavier has played have been pretty close. Like the loss to St. John's, they lost 88-83. Very close game there. The loss to Seton Hall was not as pretty. They lost 68-86, but they have lost some pretty close games. I mean, you look at January 7th, Marquette, they lost 65-66. You look at Xavier Georgetown, they played a close game. They won though, 80-77. I mean, some of their other losses have also just not been very pretty. I mean, you look at Creighton. They lost 98-57. It was just not a good game. But I think now UConn might have a shot. Well, not UConn might have a shot, but if Xavier keeps this game close, I think they have a shot. Just because, again, they are starting off strong with a win going into this week. But I do like UConn in this matchup. UConn, again, like I said, they've been dominant ever since they lost to Arizona towards the beginning of the year. They beat Providence 87-81. They beat Creighton 85-58. So they're starting to really build that momentum. They have had a couple of overtime wins, though, this year. They beat Providence on January 7th in overtime, 103-98. They had to take Villanova to overtime, but they ended up winning 75-67. So this UConn team could maybe just drop one here, but I just don't really see that happening because, again, their only loss right now is to Arizona, who's the number 1 team in the country. And besides that, UConn has showed that they've been able to win in those close games. So I like UConn in this matchup against Xavier. So I'm going to take UConn, and I think UConn wins by 10 points. I don't think it'll be complete domination because Xavier is starting to kind of find that momentum, and UConn sometimes plays down to opponents, and I could see them doing that at some point against Xavier. But I don't think Xavier is going to win, so I think it'll be a 10-point loss for Xavier. Then we've got Ole Miss, Tennessee. I think Tennessee wins this one pretty handily. Tennessee is really hot right now. Ole Miss, like I said before, down year for them, but Tennessee has been on a tear ever since they lost to Kentucky on January 17th. They beat Alabama 79-73, January 24th. They beat Georgia in overtime 86-85, and then they beat a hot Auburn team January 31st, 77-69. So I think Tennessee is going into this game with a lot of momentum. It's at home for them. So I'm really liking the Volunteers here. I think Tennessee wins by 15 points. I think 15-17 points, Tennessee is going to end up winning. Ole Miss did put up a little bit more of a fight than I thought they would against Vandy, and I could see them doing the same to Tennessee, but I think Tennessee is better than Vandy, even though they're ranked below them. I do like Tennessee a little bit more than Vandy just right now, just because of the way they've been playing in the past couple of games. So I think Tennessee will have a little bit better of a time with Ole Miss than Vandy did. So I'm going to take Tennessee by about 12. I'm going to take them by 12. Then we've got Duke, Boston College. I think that one will be complete domination of the Eagles. I think Duke will take care of business pretty easily. And I mean, especially because it's at Duke. I mean, everything right now is just kind of playing into Duke's favor. Duke has looked amazing the past few games, so I'm giving it to Duke, especially the way they just absolutely handled Louisville at home. Boston College, just start digging your grave, because it's going to be a long day for you today. So, yeah, I'm going to take Duke by 25 in this one. By 25 or more. Give me the Blue Devils. Then we've got St. John versus DePaul. St. John has played some pretty close games, some not so close games, some great close wins, some really bad, poor, close losses, but DePaul has been interesting, to say the least. I mean, they've been playing largely close games, win or loss. Like, they lost to Xavier 68-66 on Saturday. They lost to Georgetown by 9, 61-70 on Wednesday, the 28th. They beat Seton Hall by 7, 67-60. They lost to Butler by 7, 80-87. They beat Marquette by 5, 80-75. They lost to UConn by 12, 60-72. I mean, that they played UConn better than most teams have played UConn. So I think DePaul, they could sneak up. I mean, they really could sneak up on this St. John's team. I mean, if they keep it close, DePaul could get the win. But you know what? Yeah, I think DePaul is somehow, I don't know how they're going to do it, but there's just something inside of me that is telling me that DePaul is going to get the win over St. John's. It's at DePaul too. I feel like this could be a trap game. But yeah, I'm going DePaul by 3. I think they win in a just absolute shootout against St. John's. I think it's going to be just a crazy game to watch. It's not going to be on really anybody's radar, just because DePaul has such a bad history, especially the past few years. I think or St. John's, I could see them overlooking this DePaul team and losing by 3 or 4 points. It's on the road. It's set up as a trap game, so I'm taking DePaul there by 3 or 4. Then we've got Pitt, Virginia. Pitt is traveling to Virginia. I think Virginia wins this one pretty handily. I like the way they've been playing the past few games. Virginia, they've accumulated some pretty good wins, or not necessarily good wins, but just dominating wins for the most part, besides losing to North Carolina 85-80 on January 24th. But they had an overtime win against Notre Dame, 100-97, but they had to pull up a huge comeback to get that win. So I'll give credit when credit's due. That was solid performance by Virginia. Obviously not in the first half, but that second half, they obviously had to put in a lot of work to get to 100 points. I mean, it was just, I was shocked to see that Notre Dame was up against Virginia at half. That was crazy. It was at Notre Dame too, so that was set up as a trap game, but Virginia escaped. Then Virginia traveled to Boston College, where they won 73-66. So I think this Virginia team, I think they beat Pittsburgh in a pretty dominating fashion. It's their first game at home since the North Carolina game. And yeah, I just, again, really like the way this Virginia team has been playing, but Pitt was a bit underwhelming for me also in that game against Syracuse. I thought Pitt was going to, upset Clemson. I didn't mean to say Syracuse, I meant Clemson. But Pitt was really underwhelming in that game against Clemson. So I think Virginia should manhandle them. Maybe not manhandle them, but win in a pretty big way. I think I'm going to take Virginia by 16 points against this Pitt team, because obviously I think Virginia is better than Clemson, and this is going to be at Virginia, and Pitt traveled to Clemson. So I could see this Pitt team coming in a little bit tired. So I'm going to take Virginia by 16. Then we've got St. Louis versus Davidson to round out today's slate. I think St. Louis, they've looked like one of the more dominant group of 5 teams in the country. Well, I guess group of 5 teams in the country. I'm more just saying group of 5 just because like they would be considered group of 5 in college football. And a lot of people think in terms of college football. So I'm like just kind of going off of that a little bit. But yeah, a non-power 4 team, I guess, is probably what I should say. But yeah, I'm going to take St. Louis over Davidson. It's at Davidson, but St. Louis, like I said, they've just looked like one of the more dominant teams in the country, especially at that level. So I'm taking St. Louis by. I mean, they won their previous game. It was against Dayton. I thought that was going to be a lot closer, but St. Louis killed them 102-71. It was not even close at all, except for maybe the first 2 minutes. But besides that, it was not very close. So, yeah, I'm not going to doubt St. Louis again for a while. So I'm going to take St. Louis to beat Davidson by 25. I think they win by 25. I don't care that it's on the road. I think St. Louis wins by 25. Because, again, they've looked like a just insanely dominant team, especially at that level. So then we move on to Wednesday's slate. We've got Michigan State, Minnesota. I think Michigan State wins by 13 points there. It's on the road at Minnesota, but Minnesota, like I said a little bit earlier in the broadcast, has looked pretty cold. They just haven't really looked very good. Not like the beginning of the in-conference schedule. So I'm going to take Michigan State by, let's say 14. I think 14 is pretty decent because I don't think they'll walk all over Minnesota. They're not going to get walked all over, but they're definitely not going to win. So I'm gonna say Michigan State 14 points. They get the win. They've got UCF Houston. Now, if this was in UCF, I'd probably take UCF. They've shown that at home they play like they can beat anybody, but this is them going against Houston at Houston. So it's hard for me to really take UCF. I think they could keep it close, but I just don't think they're going to end up beating Houston. I think it'll be about 8 points. I think Houston wins by 8 in this one. They've got Notre Dame, Louisville. Notre Dame travels to Louisville. I like Louisville in this matchup. Notre Dame has been very inconsistent to say the least. Obviously, they had that game against Virginia where they almost beat them. I mean, they took them to overtime, so that's something to consider. But sometimes that's just a one-time thing, and Notre Dame has had some pretty low lows this year in college basketball. I mean, they lost to Purdue Fort Wayne earlier this year, and I can't really let that go. I can't forget that. So I'm going to take Louisville, and I think Louisville wins by 18 points in this one. I don't think it'll be very close. Then we've got Northwestern versus Illinois. I like Illinois in this one. Northwestern has played some weird games in the past where they just come out on top for no reason whatsoever. And I'm not necessarily talking about this year. I'm talking about years prior. But Northwestern hasn't really looked very competitive this year, at least in comparison to Illinois. I mean, they did beat USC. I'll give them that, but they also lost to Washington. So they're really inconsistent, and I don't like inconsistent teams. Illinois also beat them earlier this year at Northwestern, 79-68. So this is a rematch, a little less than a month later. So I'm taking Illinois in this one because it's at Illinois. I think Northwestern will definitely play up and play more competitive because it's in their rivals' arena, but I think Illinois wins by 22 points. I think it'll be a pretty dominant performance by them. They are one of the hottest teams in the country right now, so I'm not going to doubt them or put anything against them. So I'm taking Illinois by 25. I think it'll be dominant. Then we've got BYU, Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State, they're not too terrible. but they're also not great either. I mean, they played Iowa State pretty close. They lost 84-71. They did beat Kansas State by 1 point. They also played Iowa State earlier this year, and the score was damn near the same. It was 71-83 that they lost. But they have also played some not great games. They lost to Texas Tech 80-102 in the beginning of January. They also lost to Baylor January 13th, 94-79. They've had some close games. They had a close game against TCU, 65-68, where they lost. They just haven't been great. They've gotten some wins, but they haven't been really that competitive. I mean, the fact they were able to compete with Iowa State is actually pretty impressive, but I just don't think that against this BYU team that it's going to be that competitive. I don't think they match up very well. Even though it's at Oklahoma State, I'm going to take BYU here. I think it'll be close, though. I think it's going to be a weirdly close game, kind of like those Iowa State ones. I think it'll be an 11-point game. Give me BYU by 11 in this one. Then we've got Clemson-Stanford. Like I said before, Stanford has had some weird wins, to say the least. They've also had some very close games. They played Florida State close. They lost 80-88. They lost to Miami in a 9-point game, 70-79. They lost to Cal in a 12-point affair, 78-66. But that's a rivalry game. They got dominated by Duke, 80-50. So right now, Stanford's on a bit of a losing streak. They're on a 4-game losing streak right now. They did beat North Carolina 95-90. So maybe Stanford goes back to that. Hard to say if they will go back to that. They do also have a loss against Notre Dame earlier this year, 47-40. They did also beat Louisville 80-76. So, I mean, this Stanford team is just not very consistent. At least in Stanford's case, I do like that it's at Stanford. I think that's really great for them. And I think that could serve well to their advantage because Clemson is traveling all the way across the country for this game. But I doubted Clemson last week, and Clemson, they're not doing too bad right now. They're on a 2-game win streak right now. They beat Georgia Tech 77-63. They beat Pittsburgh 63-52. So I'm not going to doubt Clemson necessarily. They also don't really have that bad of a record either. And they can win in those close games. So I like Clemson in this matchup. I think it'll be a very close matchup, but ultimately I think Clemson is going to get the win. So I'm going to take Clemson by 5 points. I think Clemson wins by 5 or 6 points. I think Clemson is probably going to have to come back from behind. I wouldn't be surprised if Stanford goes out to an early lead just because, it's at home. They're going to have that home crowd rallying behind them. And maybe Clemson, because again, they're traveling all the way across the country for this game, they could get off to a slow start. So I could see Stanford maybe having a lead going into the half, but I don't think Stanford is going to be able to finish this game out. And I think ultimately Clemson's going to find their way back and they're going to win by about 4. So give me Clemson by 3 to 5 points. I'll make it a little bit of a gap, but yeah. Clemson, Portland. Clemson, Portland. Gonzaga, Portland. My mistake. Portland is not one of the better teams in the country, to say the least. It's just Gonzaga, again, they only have 1 loss right now. Portland is in the bottom 3 of the West Coast Conference. Gonzaga, obviously, at the top. Santa Clara is in second above St. Mary's, which is a little bit surprising. So, Santa Clara, I might want to keep an eye out on them, at least for the conference tournament. But, yeah, Gonzaga right now is head and shoulders above the rest of the conference. Portland, one of the bottom tier teams. They're currently 3-8 within the West Coast Conference. I like Gonzaga a lot in this matchup. I think they absolutely dominate Portland. I think I could see this being a 30-point game at most. I think it'll be about a 27 to 30-point game. One of the more dominant games that's probably going to happen this week. So I'm taking Gonzaga by about 27 or 30. Then we move on to Thursday. We've got Penn State, Michigan. I think talked about this a little bit earlier when I was previewing before the sponsorship message. I think Michigan probably handles this team a lot better. Penn State was able to force Michigan to turn the ball over, but I just don't think that that's going to happen this time. Michigan beating Michigan State and Nebraska the way that they did, I don't really see that happening. But on the other side of the coin, you look at the fact that they beat two top 10 teams, and maybe they're tired going into this game. Maybe they're still celebrating beating Michigan State and Nebraska, because obviously those are huge wins for them. So I could see maybe Michigan comes into this game where they're just a little bit too high and mighty, and maybe they give this one up. But I don't see it. I just don't think that's going to happen, because sometimes you also, and this is more likely what happens as well, but teams go off of a big win or a big win streak, and they just have that momentum, and they just ride that momentum, and it just doesn't stop. And so I think Michigan wins by 16 points. I think it'll be about 16 points where Michigan wins. And I think it'll be a largely dominant game. I think Michigan maybe starts off slow the first 5 minutes, and then after that, they just take the game over. But yeah, I really like Michigan in this matchup against Penn State. Then we've got UConn St. John's, another one that I kind of previewed before the sponsorship message. I like the way UConn has been playing. Again, really ever since they lost to Arizona, they've been able to win close games. They've been able to dominate teams. They just know how to win. St. John's, they're in a little bit of a interesting spot just because they're on a solid win streak. They also lost to Providence at the beginning of January, and Providence is one of the worst teams right now in the Big East, which normally isn't the case, but this year it is. But St. John's is on a pretty big win streak. They beat Butler, they beat Creighton, Marquette, Villanova, Seton Hall, and Xavier, and Butler. So 7-game win streak right there. Could be 8, depending on how they play DePaul later tonight. But I do think St. John's could maybe get the win. It's in St. John's, so it'll be in Madison Square Garden. But yeah, I don't want to doubt this UConn team. They've been just so dominant, so you can't really doubt them. I think it'll be a close game, but I do think UConn is going to end up winning. I think it'll be about, say, a 7 or 8 point game. I think it'll probably end up being about 7 or 8 points that separates these two teams. But ultimately, I think UConn will end up getting the win. Then move on to the Saturday slate, and there's a lot of games on Saturday that we got to go through. So here we go. We've got Nebraska-Rutgers. They're traveling to Rutgers. I think Rutgers is one of the not-so-great teams in the country, to put it nicely. And yeah, I like this Nebraska team. They're on a 2-game losing streak right now, but I do like this team, and I think a game against Rutgers on the road, getting that win will be a great way to get back on track for the Cornhuskers. And I think they're going to go into this game seeing it that way. So I'm going to take Nebraska. And I think it'll be by 7 points, 8 points. I think it could be weirdly close like that, or it's just going to be an absolute thrashing where Nebraska wins by 30 plus. So it's a big range from in between there, but I don't think there's really going to be anything in between that. So give me Nebraska by either 7 or 8 or by 30 plus. Then we've got Arkansas, Mississippi State. I do like this Arkansas team. I think this game against Mississippi State is a great rebound game for them. And Mississippi State, I mean, they're not terrible, but they're also not really contending for an SEC title by any means. So I'm taking Arkansas here. I think Arkansas wins by 17 points. Relative, like, pretty dominant performance. I think it's going to end up being a statement win, kind of like Purdue over Maryland, where they come in angry and they just take out and punish whatever team is in front of them. And the team for Arkansas that happens to be in front of them that day is Mississippi State. So, yeah. Now we move on to Syracuse, Virginia. I think Syracuse isn't too bad. I mean, they have a string of losses right now. It's a 5-game losing streak. They lost to Boston College in overtime, 81-73. They lost to Virginia Tech, 76-74. They lost to Miami, 85-76. NC State, 88-68. And Notre Dame, or they beat Notre Dame though, 86-72. So they're going to have a game against North Carolina. Maybe they continue the win streak. They probably won't. But I think Syracuse is probably going to end up losing to Virginia either way. But yeah, Syracuse currently in the middle of the standings in the ACC, like the bottom of the middle of the standings in the ACC. But yeah, I just really like the way this Virginia team has been playing so far this year. So I'm gonna take Virginia against Syracuse, and I think it'll be an 11-point game. I think it'll be 11 to 13 points that separates these two teams, but Virginia's going to come out on top. Then we've got Louisville traveling to Wake Forest. Now, this one could be interesting. Louisville currently kind of in the upper part of the middle. They're 7th in the ACC. Wake Forest is currently at the bottom of the ACC. They're currently 11-11, 2-7 in the ACC conference. But it could maybe be interesting just because it's at Wake Forest, and the ACC has had some pretty crazy games this year where there's just upsets that nobody sees coming. I don't think that's going to be the case here. I don't want to believe that that's going to be the case here. So I think it'll be weirdly close though. Kind of like the St. John's UConn game where UConn's traveling to an inferior opponent, but because they're traveling to the inferior opponent's place and playing at their place, it'll end up being close. So I could see maybe Wake Forest striking Louisville off guard, but Louisville coming back and making second half adjustments and getting the job done. I think Louisville ends up winning by 15 points. I think it's going to be a 15-point game for Louisville against Wake Forest. Then we've got Oregon-Purdue. They're traveling to West Lafayette. I think Purdue should manhandle this team. I mean, if they play the way they played against Maryland, Purdue is a very tough team to beat. But if they play the way they played against UCLA and against Indiana, then Oregon has a shot in this game. But this is one of the not so great years that Oregon has played so far this year. They just, it feels like ever since they've joined the Big Ten, they've progressively gotten worse than what they were at in the Pac-12. So, I mean, you just look at the standings with the Big Ten. Like, Oregon is currently at the bottom. They're tied with Penn State as worst in the Big Ten. They're both 1-10 in the Big Ten. Like, I mean, the fact that both these teams got one in-conference win is kind of amazing. But, I mean, just because of the way they've been playing. But still, I mean, 1-10 in the Big Ten after last year not having that bad of a year, beating Indiana in the Big Ten tournament, not making too much of a fool of themselves in the Big Ten tournament or in the Big Ten last year. But this year, Oregon has looked pretty pathetic, to put it nicely, when it comes to college basketball. So I think Purdue probably continues this win streak. I think Purdue just absolutely thrashes this Oregon team like they did to Maryland. I don't think it'll be by as much, though. I think it'll be by 25 instead of 30. But I do think it's going to be a thrashing. So, yeah, I'm going to say Purdue over Oregon by 25 plus. Then we've got Baylor, Iowa State. Baylor, they're not too bad, but they're also not really contending for a Big 12 title this year. They were on a losing streak. They were on a 4-game losing streak before beating West Virginia 63-53. They lost to Kansas, Texas Tech, TCU, and Cincinnati. So the opponents just kind of progressively got worse for Baylor, and they just kept losing. But maybe this West Virginia game is a great bounce back game for them. Maybe they continue that when they play Colorado on Wednesday. But Iowa State, they've been the most dominant team in the Big 12. It's really hard to argue against that. I mean, Arizona, I think, is probably the most dominant team. But besides Arizona, I think even though Iowa State's currently third in the Big 12 standings behind Houston, I think Iowa State is a more dominant team than Houston. And that might be a hot take, but the way they've been playing, it's impressive. Like, they've been dominating pretty much everybody they've played. So I like Iowa State a lot in this matchup, and the fact that this game is going to be at Iowa State, there's just so much right now in favor of this Iowa State team. They've been on fire. Like, they're on a win streak right now. I mean, they beat Kansas State 95-61. They beat Colorado 97-67. They beat Oklahoma State 84-71. UCF 87-57. They did lose to Cincinnati little less than a month ago on January 17th, 70-79, and lost to Kansas the 13th, 84-63. So Kansas dominated them at their own place. But ever since those two games, Iowa State has just been on a tear. So I think Iowa State is they're going to get the win here. I think Iowa State is going to just absolutely manhandle this team. And yeah, I think it'll probably be a 22-point game. I think it'll be 22 points. All right, then we've only got time for like 2 more games, so we'll go with the Duke-UNC game and the Michigan State-Illinois game. I think Duke wins this one. It's at North Carolina, but I think Duke is going to end up winning by about 6 points. I think it'll be 5 or 6 points that this Duke team wins by. North Carolina is a tough place to play, so I really like this Duke team. And again, the way they've been playing really great. Like, they have been playing like a top 4 team. North Carolina, they've been pretty inconsistent. They have some good wins, but they have some losses. So, yeah, I like Duke in this one. Then I've got Illinois, Michigan State. I think Illinois, even though they're traveling to Michigan State, I think they take care of business. I mean, the way they've been playing amazing. And I think they match up well against this Michigan State team. I think physically they match up well as well. I think it'll be a close game. I think it'll be a 3-point game, though, because Michigan State, I mean, there are no slouches over there in Michigan State. So I think Michigan State ends up winning by... Illinois is going to end up winning against Michigan State by, I think, 5 points. I think it'll be a 5-point game. And Florida, Texas A&M, I did want to touch on that a little bit. But Florida, Texas A&M, I like both these teams right now, but I want Texas A&M to win. I do think Florida's going to end up winning, though, probably by 3 points. I think it'll be a very close game, though. And even though Texas A&M loses this game, I think it'll be enough to get Texas A&M into the top 25 for the first time this year. So I think Florida wins by 3 in this game. All right. With that being said, that's all we have time for today. If you missed today's broadcast, or if you want to re-listen to the broadcast, you can go to the Patreon, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, search up Slide Into Sports, and you'll see my logo and the WVLP logo in there. And you can also go back to previous episodes, see how wrong I was or how right I was on some of my picks. And yeah, with that being said, slide out.